Okay, here we are again. That was a complete waste of 10 minutes. Sorry guys. I did a Facebook Live earlier from my laptop, but for some reason I couldn't see any comments, even though I was asking people to comment if they can hear me. But because I couldn't read any comments, I had to start all over again. Because I didn't want to do a 1-hour workshop on how to write fiction and not have anyone hear me. But I'm more comfortable with the phone anyway, so I'm assuming all is well, and hopefully you can hear me. Okay, so welcome to the How to Write Fiction workshop. Now what I'm going to have to do is wait for everyone to log in again. So hopefully it won't be too long. So while we're waiting, one of the first things I wanted to talk about is a lot of people ask me, Nim, I want to write fiction someday. I want to write short stories someday, but I'm not much of a reader. I don't like to read books. So is it possible for me to write fiction even if I'm someone who does not like reading? So I just wanted to make this clear at the very start. If you're an aspiring fiction writer, then it is a prerequisite that you do a lot of reading. Personally, I've never met anyone who writes fiction who does not also read voraciously. Okay, so if you've so far not been a reader, it's not too late. Like I say in all my motivational talks, it's never too late and everything is fixable as much as possible. So even if you've not been a reader so far, but you aspire to write a short story someday, you're aspiring fiction writer, you want to write a piece of fiction or imaginative writing, it is very important that you read a lot. You read not only in the genre that you're hoping to write, you read all kinds of different genres. Okay, so let's say you want to write a crime thriller. It doesn't mean you only read crime books. I would suggest you read romance, you read fantasy, you read science fiction, and of course you read a lot of crime as well, if that's what you're aspiring to write. Now, I'm going to ask everyone to say quickly, hi Nim, because it'll give me the pleasure of finally seeing the comments here on my phone, because earlier I was doing it on my laptop, and for some miraculous reason, I couldn't see any comments, which was freaking me out. So if you want to say a quick hi or hello Nim, that'll be great, and we can get started. So yes, so please start reading a lot if you are hoping to write a piece of imaginative writing someday. That's the first thing I wanted to talk about. Then I wanted to talk about some mistakes, common mistakes a lot of new writers do, budding writers do, when they're first getting started with fiction writing. Oh, there come my highs. How nice. Hi, Pari. How are you? Hi, Manisha. Hi, Esther. Hi, Parag. Welcome everyone to the How to Write Fiction workshop. My apologies for starting a little late. I was trying to be a bit adventurous and do it from my laptop, but there were some technical glitches there, but here we are. So I'm going to talk about some mistakes to avoid when you are a first-time fiction writer. And before I go into all that, for those of you who don't know me, I am currently writing book number 4. So I've written 3 books so far. They've all been in the English language. 2 of them have been translated into Marathi language, which I'm very thrilled about. And I've written fiction as well as non-fiction. Before you ask me what book number 4 is, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, I'm actually torn between deciding what it's going to be, because I've been sort of putting down ideas for a fiction book, which is the sequel to Diary of an Immigrant Bride, which is my book number 1. But I'm also putting together some thoughts for a non-fiction self-help book, right? So I'm going to just see which way it takes me. And once I've decided what book number 4 is going to be, I'll make an official announcement. But for today, a lot of the learnings I am going to share with you are based on my first book, and it is a mirror image. So excuse me, because my phone, being a Samsung, does not have the right way around. So that's Diary of an Immigrant Bride. It's Unraveling Anjali, Diary of an Immigrant Bride. It's got roughly 90,000 words, 90,000 words, and it took me about 3 years while I was working full-time to write this book. Hopefully that doesn't scare you off, because it may not take you that long to write your fiction. All right, so let's begin with some mistakes to avoid. The first point I made at the very start was you need to read a lot if you want to become a fiction writer someday. That is non-negotiable. All right, the second thing is, let's say you've started writing. You've started putting together some thoughts on paper, okay? One of the mistakes most beginner writers do is the inner critic, the internal editor is switched on. And every sentence you write, that editor comes alive. It reads that sentence and it tells you this is a rubbish sentence. You need to delete it and you need to type it all over again until your sentence is absolutely perfect and captures everything you want it to say. Big, big mistake. It's not just for first-time writers, even for experienced writers, it is very important that you switch off your internal editor when you are writing. The internal editor is basically that voice inside your head which is overcritical and which stops you every step of the way from continuing because the sentence you just wrote in your notebook or typed on your laptop, according to you, is pure rubbish. Now, trust me, I have written a lot of rubbish sentences when I was writing all my books. It is normal when you're writing your first draft, second draft, third draft, that a lot of the stuff that comes out is actually not very good. In fact, let alone not very good, it's pretty bad, right? But you need to have faith that writing is something that becomes better, like wine, as you practice more, as you evolve more, your writing becomes better. So first thing you need to do is give up the expectation that when you sit down to write one Saturday afternoon, the paragraph you're going to write is going to be the best thing ever. Just the other day I was, I was cleaning some old drawers and stuff, and I found my first draft for Diary of an Immigrant Bride. And I just left what I was doing and I started reading it. And I realized that in this book, nothing that was in my first draft made its way into the final version. Isn't that amazing? But when I was writing it, I was thinking, oh, wow, yeah, this is not bad. But none of it found its way into the final book because that was my first draft and it was pretty bad. Now, I actually wrote 21 major drafts for this book in addition to many, many smaller minor drafts. Okay, now that is a lot of editing, but that was a big piece of work. Like I said, it was 90,000 words. It had 21 major drafts. It had several editors working on it. So it was a huge piece of writing. For the large part, you may not have to have 21 drafts. I hope I'm not scaring you, but it is very important for you to recognize that the first draft will be pretty bad. So give up this expectation of perfectionism from yourself. All right. Okay, let's get started with actual fundamentals of creative writing. Okay, now let's say you get this great idea, a germ of an idea for a story. Now that could be a short story or it could be a book, whatever it is the case. You get this fabulous idea in the middle of the night and you're super excited and you know exactly what your book is going to be all about. And then nothing. You stall. You have no idea how to start, where to begin. Okay, so this is what I teach even the children who come for my creative writing programs, that the first place you need to begin any story, and a good journalist will know this as well as a good fiction writer, you begin with the 5 W's. Now, if you've attended my Creative Writing for Kids Facebook Live a few months ago, you might recall that I had talked about this very, very important part of fiction writing, which is the 5 W questions. The 5 W questions. Okay, I'm sick of my own voice. I'm going to throw a question out to you. What, according to you, are the 5 W questions that you need to start brainstorming your story idea with? What are the 5 W questions? So the letter W. I'll just wait while you type. Anu says, hi. Hi, Anu. How are you? Okay, what are the 5 W questions? Who would like to tell me what are the 5 W questions you need to ask yourself before you start writing a story. So you're currently at the structure stage of a story, and you're going to start structuring the different parts. Does anyone know what the 5W questions are? Manisha says what, why, when, where. Yes, fabulous. That's 4 of them. What's the 5th one? What, why, when, where. That's 4. And then we need a 5th one, which is actually the most important one. Okay, I will let you know. It is who, W-H-O. Okay, so the 5W questions are who, where, when, what, why. Manisha says it's on the tip of my tongue, but I forgot. That's fine. Kardonoral, I hope I said your name correctly. And you said namaskar in the beginning. Namaskar to you too. Who, what, when, where, why. Fabulous. And Anu says, who are my readers? Anu, that's an important part of understanding who you're writing for. But the who that I'm talking about here, which is part of 5W questions, is a little different to asking who are my readers. Although it is very important to know who your readers are. But in terms of story structure, the who would stand for something a little different. All right, so do you have your notebooks and pens ready? Because we're going to brainstorm your story idea. I think you should use today's session to be able to get a bit of structure around your story. So let's say you've had the story idea for the last 10 years and you've done nothing about it. This is a great opportunity. We have another 45 odd minutes for you to start writing something, so that if you have any questions, you will have the opportunity during the live session to ask me. Okay, always a good idea to attend a fiction workshop with a notebook and pen. All right, so let's begin with who. So you have an idea for a story. You roughly know you're going to write about this guy or this woman who faces XYZ problem. Okay, you know roughly. So you don't know where to start. How I would begin, and I began this book, 90,000 words, with the 5W questions. It's something a lot of very good journalists start with as well. It's something that most fiction writers would start with as well. All right, so the first W question, who is my story about? Okay, who is my story about? Who is the protagonist? I'm sure you've all heard of this word. If you haven't, protagonist is the main character of your story. Okay, so who is your protagonist? In my case, my protagonist is a 26-year-old woman who's born and raised in Mumbai, and her name is Anjali. I was very, very clear in my head who the protagonist of my story was going to be. You cannot afford to be confused about who your story is about. Even if you're writing about a group of 4 friends, you can't give them equal space on the stage. You must decide who the main character is. Maybe they're all important, but in your mind as the creator of those characters, you must know who the story is about. I know a lot of the stuff you've written is absolutely right in terms of the foundation of your story, but where story structure is concerned, the who, what, where, when, and why are questions that ask slightly different questions. So you will get a bit more insight into that as we progress through the workshop. But yes, you have very, very valid points. It's very important to know what thoughts you're going to leave them with and why your perspective as an author is important. But here we're discussing 5W questions for you to get your story idea into some form of clear structure. So we're talking about 5W questions from a story structure perspective. So you have an idea how to build a structure on it with these 5W questions. So the who stands for who is your protagonist. When I'm doing the who part of my 5W questions, it's very important for me to also know who my antagonist is going to be. Can anyone tell me what the antagonist stands for? Who is the antagonist according to you? What's the meaning of antagonist? So an antagonist is the bad guy, the villain in your story. Every good story will have a positive force and an evil force. Now here's an interesting thing. The antagonist doesn't always have to be a person. It can be a character trait of your main character. Okay, the antagonist, for example, let's say your main character is afraid of heights. Okay, and let's say that your main character has to board this particular flight, and that's sort of the central idea of your story, and attending getting onto that flight is absolutely important. But to do that, she has to overcome her fear of heights. So in that case, the story will revolve around your character overcoming that fear that she may have had within her since childhood of heights. Now that is the antagonist. There's no other evil villain in the story except her own fear. Okay, so I need you to understand as a fiction writer or as an aspiring fiction writer that an antagonist is the bad guy, the bad person, the villain. But it does not have to be necessarily another human being. It could be a character trait, a fear, a mindset that your main character has to overcome. Okay, it could be your character versus society. So maybe, there are some traditions that your main character is fighting against. Then those traditions that your character does not believe in, those would become the antagonist. All right, so let's just check some questions. Ram says, hi. Hi, Ram. Manisha says, the person who opposes the thoughts of the protagonist. Yes, Manisha, absolutely right. Anu says, a differing perspective of person. Manisha asks, does a story have to have an antagonist? Like I said, Manisha, it doesn't have to be a person. And Manisha says, can you have one without one? Well, if there is no form of a negative force, so like I said at the beginning, a few moments ago, there has to be some kind of force that is opposing your character, and that is the antagonist. It doesn't have to be another human being. If there is no negative force, then there is no conflict. There is no problem. And if there is no conflict and there is no problem that your main character has to overcome, then your character and everyone around the character is super happy, and no one wants to read a story in which everyone is happy and nothing happens. In fact, one of the popular teachings for us fiction writers, we've been told that you have to get your character up a tree somehow, then throw rocks at that character, and then help your character come back down. What that means is everything is going well, and then your character gets into some trouble, which is getting the character up the tree. Then you throw rocks at your character, which means you make life miserable for your character. Your character has to face a lot of obstacles. Okay, as soon as your character solves one problem, it's faced with another slightly bigger problem. And when she or he solves that problem, he's faced with something a little bigger. Your character has to go through a series of obstacles and challenges before they're able to do the final transformation, which is, it could be overcoming their fear, or it could be defeating the opponent. So Manisha, to answer your question, yes, there has to be an antagonist, but it doesn't have to be in the traditional sense of another human being. So it doesn't have to be someone who's trying to sabotage your main character's career, or it doesn't have to be a family member who is trying to break her marriage. Okay, it doesn't have to be another human being. It could be something internal. In the case of my book, Diary of an Immigrant Bride, her biggest enemy was that she didn't believe in herself. She didn't have a sense of identity, which caused her to make many, many decisions that didn't serve her well. So at the end of Diary of an Immigrant Bride, she does find herself, she does find a sense of identity, she does transform and evolve, and she does become a very different Anjali to who she was at the start of the book. So in my story, it is not her husband, who is the bad guy, even though he's frequently absent and he's not much of a husband and he's a workaholic. He's still not the bad guy, right? The problem with Anjali is that she is so diffident, so underconfident, so unsure of herself. She doesn't know her place in the world, that's what she has to overcome. And that's the biggest antagonist for her. It's because of all those reasons that Jake happened. It's because of all those reasons that, for those of you who've read the book, she did what she did and she took the choices she took because she was looking for validation. So hopefully that makes sense. And Anu says, a situation or a moral dilemma. Absolutely right. So that's what I want to make clear to all of you. You know, everyone asks me exactly what you asked me, Manisha, and it's a very, very valid question. Can a story not have an antagonist? If you remove the antagonist, you've removed the negative force. Okay, imagine writing a story where you say, once upon a time, there was a girl called Anjali, who just happens to be, by the way, my protagonist, and that's why I'm using that name. Once upon a time, there was a girl, Anjali, and she was really happy, and she was really talented, and then she was married, and her husband was very loving, and all was going well, and she came to a foreign country, and she overcame all her little challenges, and they lived happily ever after. Why would anyone want to read a book when nothing goes wrong? Nothing goes wrong. Why would you want to read a book? You want to read a book because something goes wrong in your main character's life, and then you're rooting for that character, and you're hoping against hope that they somehow manage to extricate themselves out of that dilemma, and you're hoping that they eventually win. Okay, so you've got to make life very difficult for your character before their life becomes smoother again. All right, so when you're writing the who, you need your protagonist. You must know who your main character is. You must know who the antagonist or what the antagonist is. You must know what they're battling against. It could be another person. It could be their own character trait. It could be, society and its traditions. It could even be nature. For example, if you're writing about a story about a person who is, caught up in a place where there's a tsunami and all the wreckage that happens because of the tsunami, then the tsunami is the antagonist. If you're talking about a character who gets caught in some wildfires, then the wildfires, being part of nature, is the antagonist. So hopefully I've made you all a little bit clear about what the antagonist can stand for. Anu says, decision-making itself could be the conflict in the story, an ethical dilemma. Absolutely right. That is a fabulous example of an antagonist where your character has to make a choice, but making that choice means that she has to sacrifice one of her values for another value. Both values are important, but one of them has to be sacrificed because she's facing a moral dilemma. And because she's facing a moral dilemma, there is very, very obvious conflict. And that process of decision making and choosing the right value is going to be the cause of the conflict. So that is the who. Now, it doesn't stop at your main character, protagonist, and the negative character, antagonist. You must know who your side characters are as well. Okay, now when you're doing the first draft, you don't have to know all the 21 characters that are going to ultimately be in your book. Now, for example, in my story, Diary of an Immigrant Bride, there are heaps of characters who play small roles. Now, when I was doing my first draft, there was no chance I would have known all those characters because they evolved as I wrote. But to start with, I knew who were some of the characters who were going to populate the pages of my book. I knew there was Anjali. I knew there was her husband, Ravi. I knew there was a group of friends who were going to do the karaoke singing every weekend. I knew that. So I knew that there would have to be at least 3 or 4 couples. I hadn't decided their names or anything like that, but I knew that there had to be at least one friend who was quite crafty and cunning, who was going to make Anjali's marriage very, very difficult because of her constant cunning remarks that were designed to make Anjali dissatisfied with her relationship with her husband. So I knew that there had to be one really nasty friend, which, by the way, happened to be Naina. So I knew that there was going to be that character. Then, of course, I knew that there was going to be Anne, okay, who is Ravi's ex-wife. I knew that there was going to be Jake, of course, right? The big part of my book. So while Jake, according to me, is nowhere close to being my protagonist, it is Anjali who's the protagonist, I still knew who my other characters were going to be. Some of the characters like Jake and Ravi were going to be more important than some of the other characters. Those are Anjali's friends, her parents, her in-laws, the people she works with in the travel industry when she gets her first job. All those people were going to be sort of my minor characters. So for the large part, you must know at least a few of the major players who are going to populate the pages of your story. So far, have you understood the who part? I hope you're all writing down at least some ideas so that when you finish this workshop, you can actually get started with writing your story. Now remember, creative writing, fiction writing doesn't have to be a big fat book that you're going to write. That could be your eventual goal. But I suggest, if you've never written a book before, start with the idea of writing a short story. Okay, if you start with the idea that you're going to write a short story, then you can use all the elements of fiction writing and write that short story, build your self-confidence, flex your creative writing wings, and get a bit of practice, and then you can start writing down longer stories. All right? Okay, so that is the who. Manisha says, I'm writing down the concepts, but I'm listening more. Fabulous. That's well done. So you can all listen again to the workshop and maybe put a bit of structure around your ideas later on. So we've done the who. Okay. Then it comes the where and the when. Now, where and when is part of what is known as setting. You must know where your story is set. I mean, it would be a little bit difficult if you said, oh, well, it could be set in any part of the world. Not the ideal situation, right? Because every country, every city comes with its own culture. It comes with its own challenges. It comes with its own plus points, etc. So you must know where it is set, and you must know when it was set, in which year, in which time frame. Some stories happen in a 24-hour window, so it just happens on one single day in the character's life. Some stories stretch. For example, Diary of an Immigrant Bride stretches for about between 1.5 to 2 years of Anjali's life. Okay, so I was very certain. So when I was deciding the where and the when of my story, I set my story in 1998. Okay, now the reason, even though this book was published in 2014, I set the story in 1998 because around that time, the mobile phone usage of it, social media, etc., was not really very, very common. And I wanted Anjali's love story with Jake to develop in a very old-fashioned way, because I believe that in the world of social media, it is so easy for a romance to develop, because all she would have had to do is send a quick Facebook message to Jake and say, shall we have coffee tonight? Or for him to send her a message, right? But in those days, in the mid-1990s, it was not so easy because social media was not around the way it is today. And so the romance would have had to develop in the typical old-fashioned way. And I wanted that as the flavor of my story. I could have easily set it in 2000, 2005, 2010, but I chose the mid-1990s because it was a different era. It was a different period in time, and therefore it had its own challenges. Okay, so you must know when your story is set and where your story is set. So I knew that my story was set in the mid-1990s, and it was set in Sydney, Australia. Also, I had arrived in Australia in the mid-1990s, so I remember distinctly how Sydney was 25 years ago. I remember, you know, the challenges that new migrants had to face back then. You know, it's a very, very different time period. So because I had come from Mumbai, and a lot of people often joke and say, is it your story? And I keep saying it's not, although vignettes of my life have found their way into the story. And I do believe that immigrant challenges are quite often fairly universal. So a lot of people, after reading the book, have told me that they felt like it was their story, because so many of us have faced similar challenges when we first arrive in a foreign country. So that's why I set it in the mid-1990s, because it was something I was familiar with, and so I could write from a perspective of expertise. Okay, so you must know the where and the when. Both those are part of the setting. Anu says, when and where is part of the canvas on which a story is painted. Absolutely right. So that is part of, you know, setting the context, and it is the setting. The next thing is what. Okay, what is your story about? What is the core problem? When you turn to the back of a book, there's always a little paragraph here. Do you know what that paragraph is called? What is that paragraph that's at the back of the book that tells you a little bit about the story? What is that paragraph called? Who can tell me? It starts with the letter B. And I'm sure it's a very easy answer. What is that little write-up at the back? It starts with B. So it's the blurb, B-L-U-R-B. That's the part that's written on the back cover of a book, which tells you what the story is about. So I'm going to read you my blurb so that you get an idea. And what I would like you all to do is write a blurb, just a short paragraph of maybe 6 to 7 lines that talk about the core problem in your book without giving away any spoilers. You don't want your blurb to give away spoilers. You don't want your blurb to give away what actually happens at the end of your story. You want to leave your readers hanging. So my blurb says, 1998 Australia. Anjali Jattar is looking forward to life as an immigrant bride following her arranged marriage to ambitious divorcee Ravi. Settling in, she explores not just a new culture, but also her newfound freedom. But life is less than perfect. Ravi's constant travel and preoccupation with work leave Anjali feeling increasingly unloved and lonely. Enter Jake Ellis. Ta-da! I didn't write that in the blurb, but yeah, enter Jake Ellis. Charmed by Anjali's exoticism, he finds himself gradually falling in love with her, and so begins an emotionally intoxicating roller coaster ride. That is the blurb. Okay, it is telling you about a lonely young woman who is married to a man who was already married before and he's now divorced. He is someone who's now obsessed with work. And because he's obsessed with work, he doesn't have much time for his new bride. Now remember, she's had an arranged marriage, which means she doesn't really know him very well. She's come to a foreign land, so there's a dual dilemma here. She's in a new country that she's not familiar with, but she's in this new country with a man who's a complete stranger. So you can imagine her struggle. Now, a lot of us who've had arranged marriages, I certainly have, we will know how challenging it is when you marry someone you barely know and then you fly off to this new country that you barely know. So it is super, super scary, right? I'm sure many of you watching this who've had an arranged marriage and then migrated to a foreign country, you would resonate with that. So, so basically, it is telling you about this woman who is struggling to start a new life in a foreign country. Her only support system is her husband, but her husband is always traveling. He's not there, and she has no faith in herself, very little self-confidence. Of course, the Anjali at the end of the book is a completely different person. And then enters temptation. Okay, and then what happens? So of course, in this blurb, I have not told you what happens, whether she goes off with Jake or she goes off with her husband. I have not told you about any of the challenges and obstacles she's facing. I've just given you the central problem of the story. A lonely bride, zero faith in herself, struggling with life in a new country, does not have the love and attention of her husband, and therefore, when faced with temptation in a different form from a different person, has to make some very tricky decisions and some very tough choices. That's all that is told in the blurb. So when you are still practicing writing the structure of your story, I want you to write a blurb for your story. Okay, that refers to the what W question in the 5 W questions. What is your story about? What is the core problem? Now, there will be many different problems in your story. There will be many challenges that your main character will have to overcome. There will be many obstacles, a lot of conflict, but there has to be one central core problem. You must know that in your head. So you can't afford to be wishy-washy about what the main problem is that your main character has to overcome. Okay, so if someone were to ask you, hey, can you tell me what's the main problem your character faces, you should be able to say, well, she was a neglected wife, and then she meets this guy, and then he falls in love with her, and now she has to decide whether to fight for her marriage or to give in to temptation. I've explained the problem in one simple sentence. Okay, so you must know what the core problem is, and then you design your blurb around the core problem. Any questions so far? Poonam says it's like my story as well, except Jake. Yes, Poonam, it's a lot like my story too, except for Jake. But I really enjoyed writing about Jake. He is actually one of my favorite characters. So, okay, so that is the what. Okay, then we come to the last W question, which is why. Why does your character find herself or himself in this predicament? Why does your main character find himself or herself in this situation? Okay, so in my case, when I was doing the 5W questions for Anjali's story, and of course back then it wasn't called Diary of an Immigrant Bride. For those of you who've been with me since 2011, you may remember that I started my blog Nim's Niche in 2011, and I first wrote Diary of an Immigrant Bride as a blog. I used to write every day diary entries by Anjali. So this book actually originally began as a blog post, and every day I would write a little diary entry, because the Diary of an Immigrant Bride is filled with diary entries. This is Anjali's diary that she's writing daily. And then eventually, when it sort of took on some momentum, I decided to take it offline and write it as a book. So yeah, so anyway, so why does she find herself in this predicament? The reason Anjali finds herself in this predicament is because she was someone who believed in love. She wanted to be loved. She wanted a good old-fashioned romance, right? I don't know how many of you remember, but on the very second page, Anjali writes in the diary, I was 17 when I made the decision. I would only ever marry for true love. Nothing less. That's what Anjali says on page 2 of my book. That she was 17 when she made up her mind that she would have a love marriage, that she would be swept off her feet by her knight in shining armor. None of that happened, which is sadly the conflict of the story. But the reason everything in my story happens is because deep down, Anjali wanted a romance the old-fashioned way. And when she wasn't wooed and when she wasn't loved the way she wanted to be loved in her marriage, because she didn't get that main desire of hers, you know, to have a nice romance and to be swept off her feet, because none of that happened, Jake possibly happened. So when you ask the why is the trickiest question of story structure. I suggest don't deal with the why question till the very end, till you've sorted the who, where, when, what. Only once you've dealt with those 4 W questions should you come to why, because why is the trickiest of the 5 W questions. It is the trickiest, and for you to know that, you've got to go through the rest of the steps of story structure. Okay, so I would personally begin with who. That's how I begin. Who are my characters? Protagonists, antagonists, side characters. Then I would go to the where and when. Where is my story set? When is it set? When is it happening? Then I would go to the what, which is the blurb at the back of the book. What is your story about? What is the core problem that your main character has to overcome? And lastly, why? Why does your main character find himself or herself in this predicament, in this dilemma? Manisha says, it's a beautiful story. I think I read it 4 years ago, and it still remains one of my favorites because it's so real. Oh, thank you, Manisha. I'm so glad you enjoyed the book. You know, just the other day I was flicking through the different chapters, and there are so many things that I've forgotten I've written. So I think it's time for me to read the book I've written one more time. Anu says, my characters decide a new path for themselves halfway through the story. I let them choose how the story ends. Does it happen to others? Very, very common, Anu. In fact, when I started writing Anjali, I was very certain that she should behave a certain way and she should make certain choices and she should make certain decisions. And then when I was typing, she was doing her own sweet thing and she wasn't listening to me. And I kept having to tell her, hey, you know, I'm the creator, you should listen to me. But my fingers would just keep typing and she would say things that I would be shaking my head at. I was saying, why did you say that to Ravi? Why did you say that to Anne? Why did you say that to your mother-in-law? Okay, or she would make decisions. You know, that scene where she stays back in the office where Jake is having a McDonald's burger. She stays back and part of me was saying, well, you know, you should be home. Why are you here? You know, everyone else has gone home. Why are you still in the office? And of course, she made up her own mind to do her own thing. So Anu, it is absolutely valid. And I think you're on the right track because characters do take on a life of their own and they tend to do exactly what they want to do. And as a writer, it is important for you to let them find their own path. But I also believe that as the creator of the narrative, you must always have an eye on where your story is going. Because one of the traps for beginner writers is that the story does take a life of its own and the characters take their own decisions. And then it sort of goes off track. So that's what we've got to be careful about. Okay, I knew where my story was going to end. I roughly knew what Anjali's fate was going to be. But knowing where it's going to end, I let her take her own path towards it. I knew her destination. I knew the last stop in her journey, where it was going to end, this particular, because of course there are 2 more parts to this trilogy. This book, I knew where it was going to end, but I let her find her own path to that destination. I didn't say that you've got to take this highway to this destination. I would let her take the scenic route if she wanted to. So hopefully that makes sense. So for beginner writers, I suggest that while it's okay for your characters to take on a life of their own and make their own decisions, you must have a firm grip on the story and where it is headed. Otherwise, it can just go off on a tangent and it will be hard for us to pull them back and get them to finish in a certain manner. So even if you don't know the exact ending or the exact last scene, I suggest it's a good idea to have a rough idea about where your character is going to end up at the end of the story. Okay, Manisha says, can I please ask you to summarize the 5 W's again? I did write them down, but maybe I haven't got them right. Okay, so you begin with who. That's the first W question. Who? Then you ask the setting, which is where and when. And then the what, which is the blurb of the story, which is what happens in your story. And the last one is why. So who, where, when, what, why. Okay, all right, so those were my 5 W questions. Now, because I started 15 minutes late, I'm going to be fair to you all, and even though it is 4 o'clock, which is when I'm supposed to end, I'm going to talk for another 10 minutes, and then if you've got any questions, you can ask me. Okay, so that was the 5 W questions. The next thing Anu says, I seem to like the decisions of my characters. That is great, Anu. Fabulous that you like the decisions of your characters. All I'm asking you to do is ensure that they're not making decisions for the sake of making decisions, that the decisions are leading the story towards a certain conclusion. Okay? Because otherwise the story can sort of meander and take a shape of its own. So that's basically what I'm trying. It's very important that your characters make their decisions for themselves. All my characters made their own decisions, but you know, it's like the puppets and the puppeteers. You must sort of hold the strings lightly and know roughly where you are leading them. So, you know, you basically say, hey, I want you to go in the northeast direction, but you can take your own path towards that direction, that kind of thing. Okay, so while it's important for your characters to surprise you and to keep you on your toes, I think personally as a writer, I also believe that I must know the rough layout of my story so that I can gently veer them in that direction, but along the way they can make their own decisions. So Anu, hopefully that makes sense what I've just said. All right, so the next thing I would like to talk about is show, don't tell. Show, don't tell. Very, very important part of fiction writing. And whenever I'm reading, giving feedback on stories from beginner writers, this is a mistake a lot of first-time writers make. Okay. What is show, don't tell? So basically the mistake that beginner writers make is that they will tell the reader about an emotion that their main character is experiencing. For example, in my book, let's say I want to say Anjali was angry with Ravi. So the emotion is anger. It is very tempting for beginner writers to tell their readers the emotion that the character is experiencing instead of showing the reader the emotion your character is experiencing. So let me put it to you. Let's say I want to say that my character is angry. Okay, my character is angry. But I don't want to tell you that she is angry. I want to show you that she is furious with her husband. I want to show you that she is super mad at him because of what he said or did. But I don't want to use any of those words. I don't want to say Anjali was angry, Anjali was mad, Anjali was upset, Anjali was annoyed. I don't want to say any of it. I'm going to show you that she was angry. Can any of you write down in your comments how an angry person behaves? How would you behave when you're angry? Let's say I can guess that you're angry just by looking at you, just by hearing you. What are some things an angry person would do that would make it very, very obvious to the reader that this particular character is upset? Let me sip my water while I let you write, because this is a workshop, so you need to do some work, correct? Of course, I'm going to tell you the answers, but I'm just taking a pause while I drink some water and I'll let you think about it. How does an angry person behave? Okay, can you write some things that would show me a character is angry? Let's see. Okay, yeah, Manisha says I would probably stop speaking to that person. So maybe in the paragraph, I could say, Anjali chopped onions in the kitchen and not a word came out of her. You know, she was completely silent. She wasn't even humming the way she normally hummed when she cooked. Okay, so the very fact that normally she is humming when she's cooking, but today she's absolutely silent and just chop, 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 chop. Just that action shows the reader and shows her husband that she's angry. Okay. And Manisha says, oh, glare if it's my kids. Yeah, absolutely right. So maybe Anjali just glares at her husband, and maybe as a writer, I can write that, you know, she glared and continued chopping the onions. And the kitchen was eerily silent. Usually Anjali would be humming. Poonam says, stop talking to my husband. Yeah. So I'm going to help you describe it a little more. Kale says, slam the door and walk out. Absolutely right, Kale. That is anger, right? So let's say Ravi says something to Anjali and then she doesn't respond, she doesn't say anything, but she slams the door and she walks out. That is anger. But nowhere in the paragraph have I told my reader that my main character is angry with her husband. But the slamming of the door shows that she is angry. Maybe she grits her teeth, but no words escape her lips. She grits her teeth but doesn't say anything. The gritting of the teeth shows anger. Nowhere have I said she is angry. Okay. Dialogue. Gee, I hate you. Dialogue can show she is angry. God, you annoy me, she said and slammed the door and walked out of the room. Right? I mean, those dialogues are not in this book, but I'm just trying to explain to you emotion and how to show instead of tell. Are we getting what I'm saying? So I'm nowhere saying to you, I'm not telling you that this is the emotion my character is experiencing, guys. She is angry. I'm not telling you, I am showing it through my words and description. Okay, let's take another example. Let's say let's say your main character is sad. Okay, now I don't want you to tell me that your character is sad or unhappy or disappointed. Show me through her behavior. A sad person would be sitting with hunched shoulders. A sad person would have trembling lips. A sad person would have tears in their eyes. A sad person might not be saying anything, but might just be sighing. You know, she gave a big sigh, but said nothing. Maybe she surreptitiously wiped her eyes as her husband was talking. All these actions show me, the reader, that this character is obviously unhappy about something. Okay, so for practice, I want you to write down 3 emotions. Let's say fear. So one is fear, one is disappointment, and one is, so one is fear, one is disappointment, and one could be excitement. Okay, now imagine your main character is experiencing these 3 emotions. Let's say somewhere in your story, your main character is going to be terrified, maybe because they heard a sound in the middle of the night. They're going to be terrified because somebody discovered their secret that they had protected for so many years. Okay, they're terrified at some point in their story. Please don't tell the reader that your main character was terrified. I want you to be able to write a paragraph, 3 or 4 sentences that show that emotion. Okay, so that is fear. Then let's say your main character is disappointed about something. Show that disappointment. Your main character is excited about this promotion that she's got or he's got, or she's excited because she won the lottery. Please don't tell the reader, Jane was super excited on hearing the news. No, 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 no. No. Or you don't say, she was terrified when she heard a sound from outside her window and it was only 2 a.m. in the morning. Please don't tell us she was terrified. Show us. Because when you show the reader a certain emotion, it makes the reader engaged. Have you ever read a book where you felt, oh my God, I felt like I was in that scene with her and I felt as terrified as she would have felt? The reason you are feeling the emotion your character is feeling is because the author did not tell you what the character was experiencing. She was showing it. She was describing it. Right? It's easy in movies because you're seeing the person playing that part. So that's easy. But when you're writing, that is doubly challenging because you've got to use the right words. You've got to use the right sentence. You've got to use the right description to make the reader feel as though they are there while the action is happening. I mean, I'm someone who personally loves reading thrillers, you know, mysteries, that kind of stuff. And oh my goodness, some authors make me feel my heart, I can actually feel my heart beating at thrice the normal speed because I'm so terrified because the main character in the book is terrified. And the reason I know the main character is terrified is because the author has done such a brilliant job of showing that emotion. Nowhere is that a good author going to tell me, hey Nim, guess what? This character is terrified. No. As a reader, I will sense it by the choice of words. I'm going to sense it through dialogue. Okay, so Anu says, she sighed as she continued folding the clothes and piling them in the basket. The basket grew heavier. Very good, Anu. The basket grew heavier just as her sadness probably grew heavier, right? So the heavy basket can symbolize the heaviness in her heart. Correct? So the basket almost becomes a metaphor for your main character's emotion. Now, Anu, I'm going to use this example to help all of you understand a point better. Now, there is a temptation. For example, let's say you want to say the heavy basket is, you're thinking of it as a metaphor in your mind for, let's say, the heaviness in her heart. Now, one temptation that beginner writers often given to is to explain to the reader how the heavy basket also symbolizes the heaviness in her heart. Do not fall into the trap of over-explaining something. Okay, so let's say she sighed as she continued folding the clothes and piling them in her basket. You know, her heart was heavy, and maybe the basket grew heavier. Now, suddenly, the reader will make the link that the heavy basket also symbolizes the ache in her heart. Just as her heart was getting heavier with the pain of the decision she was about to make, the basket was getting heavier. Do not fall into the trap of explaining the metaphor. Does that make sense? Because we must trust the reader. A lot of writers underestimate a reader's intelligence, and we feel tempted to explain. Why? Because we think, oh my God, I have this lovely metaphor that I'm writing. What if the reader doesn't understand? Then it's a complete waste. We must, as writers, resist the temptation to underestimate our readers. We must have faith that our readers will understand what we're trying to say. Okay? And Poonam says, sitting in her room alone. So Poonam, yeah, that is another way to show someone who is feeling sad, who's feeling lonely, who's feeling disappointed. And Anu says, I'm folding clothes while listening to it. Great multitasking, Anu. That is fabulous. All right, so that is basically show, don't tell, which is the main thing I also wanted to share with you all today. It's very, very important that you don't tell your readers about a particular emotion. So a good thing for you all to practice is think of maybe 5 to 10 different emotions, you know, fear, greed, anger, disappointment, envy. Just think of all these things. Think of different emotions, say 5 to 10 emotions, write them on different pages of your notebook, and then write down sentences that show that emotion instead of telling that emotion. How would you demonstrate that your antagonist or protagonist is a greedy person? How would you show that? Instead of telling the reader that this person is greedy, this person is stealthy, this person is cunning, how would you describe it? Okay. And Poonam says she was talking to herself in her mind and recalling all the past events like a movie. This even made her, yeah, absolutely right. So some of the ways you can show instead of tell is by using the 5 senses. So that is see, touch, hear, smell, taste. You can use that to use your description. You can show instead of telling through dialogue. So maybe the words that your character uses when they're speaking to another person can show that the person was angry, sad, disappointed, etc. You can also show an emotion through internal monologue. Internal monologue is basically the thoughts inside your character's heads. When your main character is, whichever character, is speaking to himself or herself, that is an interior monologue. So we get to know an emotion when we get to know the main character's thoughts. And another most obvious way to show instead of tell is through action. Okay, so if somebody is cunning, somebody is crafty, instead of telling, you show them opening someone else's mail that they're not supposed to. That is crafty, right? Let's say you're reading a chapter where this character sort of looks around to make sure there's no one in the room and then quickly goes and opens someone else's letter that was sealed. You don't have to tell me, the reader, that this person is crafty and cunning. I know through their behavior. Okay, so time's up. It's almost 4:15. I'm going to leave a couple of minutes in case you have any questions to ask me. And I also wanted to let you all know that my creative writing program for children, okay, so this one's not for adults, the creative writing for kids and teens, I now have put up the dates for my next program. I know many of you wrote to me and said that you were not able to get a spot in my previous program because bookings had closed, but I now have new dates. So I have 2 programs, creative writing for children. There is one program which is for children between the ages of 5 and 8. And then there I have a program for children 9 years and above. So if you have a child between the ages of 5 and 8, I have 2 options for you. I have a Tuesday group and I have a Saturday group. So in each program, there will be 3 sessions of 1 hour each. So the Tuesday 5 to 8-year-olds There's your Tuesday option is 11th, 18th, and 25th of August from 4:30 to 5:30. And your Saturday option is 15th, 22nd, and 29th of August from 3 to 4 p.m. For 9 years and above, you have a Wednesday and a Sunday group. Your Wednesday dates are 12th, 19th, and 26th of August from 4:30 to 5:30. Then the Sunday option is 16th, 23rd, and 30th of August from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. I'll put all those details in the comments section below. So it's a three-day program, 1 hour each session, and it's priced at $99. Okay, so this is a special price that I'm offering. Typically, these programs they cost a lot more, but I'm keeping it at $99. Also, the great news is that we've recently been approved as a New South Wales government creativity voucher provider. So if you've got a Creative Kids voucher, the $100 voucher, you can use it and get my program for your children for free. All right, so I'll pop those in the notes. Does anyone have any questions at all about today's workshop? Of course. Kale says, thank you for the workshop. Thank you, Kale. You're welcome. Anu says, great session, and thanks for this. You're very welcome, Anu. Thank you for joining in. Thank you, Poonam. Anu says, can we also discuss the guilt one feels when she sits down to read and write during family time? Oh, okay, yeah, guilt, writer guilt, mother guilt, all that kind of stuff, right? Personally, I'm not someone who believes in guilt, although I do understand that it is a very normal and a natural feeling. The reason many of us, particularly women, feel guilty when we are pursuing a hobby is because we feel that we should be doing something more important, or we should be doing something more for the people we love. But the way I like to look at it is, as a mother or as a wife, if I feel somewhere frustrated that I'm not able to pursue my dreams, then that frustration will seep into my personality, and I probably will not be able to give my best in my role as a mother and wife. So it's very important for me. My definition of being a good mother and wife is not only to do everything that is needed for my children, but it's also for me to look after my own emotional well-being, because when I am happy in what I'm doing, I'm able to be a better mother according to myself. So one thing I used to do when my kids were little, and I wrote 2 out of my 3 books were written when I was working full-time. I would sit with my children while they were doing homework, and I would say, well, you're doing homework and mommy's doing her homework, because I had publishers who were waiting, for my manuscript, and there were deadlines I was working towards. So I would sit next to them. They would be doing their work. I would be doing my work. And I would say, if you're stuck and if you need help, then tell me. But mommy's doing homework and you're doing homework. So we sort of sat at the family dining table, and that's where I wrote my book. And also a lot of my books were written at the kitchen counter while I was waiting for the varan bhat, dal rice, to cook in my pressure cooker. So that's in the kitchen is where I've written a lot of my books. I have also written while I was waiting to pick up my kids from their hockey games, or I write in spurts. I don't set aside 3 hours for writing. For those of you who've watched my motivational videos, you know that I'm a big believer in pockets of time. So I used to make pockets of time when I would write in my lunch breaks, but I would divide my lunch break at work. So I had an hour for lunch. I would spend 30 minutes with my colleagues, networking, getting to know them, spending quality time with my colleagues. And then 30 minutes I would just write in my car, a few thoughts here and there. So I have written my books by making use of pockets of time. And I really think that guilt is something we need to park aside, because a happy mother, a fulfilled mother, can be a good mother, right? So that's how I look at it. Manisha says, thank you for the lovely workshop. Loved it. Thank you, Manisha. Thank you, Parag. Me time is very important, says Poonam. Absolutely right. I agree with you. Alrighty, so that's it from me for today. If you would like to do maybe a one-on-one program with me for creative writing, that's something I offer as well. So please do write to info@nimgholkar.com with your query, and either myself or someone from my team will respond to you ASAP. Alrighty, thank you so much for joining me today. Next week on Saturday, I have how to write non-fiction. So please do look out for that. That'll be on the page as well. Until then, take care. Happy writing. Bye for now.